We had this weekend circled all season long, and it did not disappoint. Let's recap Week 7 in the SEC.
You are now listening to the War Report Podcast Network.
Yes, sir. What's up, college football fans, SEC fans? We're here to recap another wild weekend in the Southeastern Conference, really in college football in general, but we focus on the SEC here. Like I said in the intro there, we had October 12th circled all summer long, and boy, did it not live up to the hype. One of the best Saturdays that we've had in college football in a long time. I don't feel like I saw any blowouts other than Texas, Oklahoma, and we'll get into that. But let's go ahead and start with what I thought was the best game of the year. That's right. I said it. I think this game was even better than Georgia, Alabama, even though that was a classic. But this LSU versus Ole Miss game had everything that I thought it was going to have. It was just a wild game from start to finish. And if you're Ole Miss, you got to feel like you had every chance to win this game. But that's easier said than done. Brian Kelly now undefeated at night in Death Valley. LSU fans love that. It's a tough place to play, right? But when you can hold it down the way Brian Kelly has, you're going to the LSU faithful there in Baton Rouge are going to love that. So I think I go back to this Jackson Dart interception with 11 minutes and 11 seconds on the clock. They're in LSU territory. They're up 20-16. If you feel like, okay, if Ole Miss scores right here, they're going to go up by 2 scores. LSU would be getting the ball back with somewhere around 10 minutes to go, and instead, LSU or Ole Miss throws an interception in the end zone. Bad throw by Jackson Dart. Then, just a few plays later, Garrett Nussmeier with a bad throw turns it over right back to Ole Miss. However, the field position flips on that. Ole Miss ends up getting sacked and losing more yardage and getting nothing out of that next possession coming off of the turnover. And I just felt like that interception at that 11-minute, 11-second mark by Jackson Dart in the end zone really, really forced it. Didn't have to do that. It was a 1st and 25 situation. Just a bad throw. And if Ole Miss if he throws that out of bounds, or if he runs for a few yards or makes any decision but that, Ole Miss still has an opportunity to come in, punch the ball in the end zone, and go up 27-16. And who knows? It's Baton Rouge. It's at night. Garrett Nussmeier's the dog, and the LSU offense can do a lot of things. But I just felt like that was a golden opportunity for Ole Miss to close the game out. But you can go down the game and you can look at the plays, and for every time that Ole Miss didn't take those opportunities to close the door and win the game, LSU did. Garrett Nussmeier, 3rd down run on 3rd and 13, 8 minutes and 15 seconds to go in the 4th quarter. Big. They're backed up. Big run to get the 1st down, keep the drive alive. Ole Miss has the ball in LSU territory, 20-16. Inside 5 minutes, has to settle for a field goal. So similar to that Jackson Dart interception a couple possessions before that, you're in their territory. You've got an opportunity again to score and close the game out. You're moving the football, but instead you kick the field goal. Now it's 23-16. Then Ole Miss gets LSU on a 4th and 7, 2 minutes and 22 seconds to go. 4th and 7, Garrett Nussmeier completes the pass. Then with 3rd and 10, again, 3rd and 10, 1 minute, 45 seconds left. LSU converts. Then you get the 4th and 5 touchdown with 32 seconds to go. So a 4th and 7 with 2:22 left, a 3rd and 10 with 1:45 left, and then a 4th and 5 with 32 seconds to go. And Garrett Nussmeier completes the touchdown pass to Anderson. So there's 3 times right there on the final drive where Ole Miss just can't get off the field. And on the flip side, LSU stepping up and making the plays. Then you get to overtime. Ole Miss goes backwards. I do got to shout out Ole Miss kicker Caden Owens. Hits a tough 57-yarder in Baton Rouge. That is not easy to do. Otherwise, all LSU does right there is just have to kick the field goal and they win the game. That was a big-time kick by that kid, and he put it through the uprights, no doubt. I thought that was a very clutch moment. But ultimately, it doesn't matter because LSU comes right down, and Garrett Nussmeier completes a 25-yard touchdown pass to KJ Lacey in overtime. You see the picture right there on your screen if you are watching on YouTube. And there's your ball game. LSU with a big 29-26 win. It's as crazy as we thought it was going to be, folks. Taking a look at the stats, Jackson Dart was 24 for 42, 284 yards, 1 touchdown, and that 1 interception that I really think just came at a bad time. Garrett Nussmeier, 22 for 51, 3 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, 22.9 QBR there. And LSU, look, they were not able to run the ball. The freshman that's been getting hyped the last couple of weeks have been playing well. Caden Durham, 12 rushes for 37 yards, only averaged 3.1 a carry there. Josh Williams, 9 carries, 34 yards. Ole Miss was able to run the ball a little bit, though. Ulysses Bentley's with 11 carries for 107 yards. He averaged 9.7 a carry with a touchdown. A lot of that coming on the long of 50 yards. Henry Parrish Jr. with 14 carries for 42 yards. And Jackson Dart, a little skewed with the sacks, 15 carries for 27 yards. And that's the number, the sacks. That's the number. Really, Garrett Nussmeier, for all that LSU didn't do in the run game, offensive line, not able to establish a run, Garrett Nussmeier with a clean day. He was not sacked one time when there was pressure, and there wasn't a whole lot of pressure. When there was pressure, he looked like a pro's pro in the pocket with great presence, stepping up, avoiding any kind of rush, and delivering a good ball downfield. And then Ole Miss giving up 6 sacks. Ole Miss giving up 6 sacks, and they seem to have come at the worst times for Ole Miss. Major Burns for LSU with 1.5 sacks, and then Braden Swinson added 2 sacks on the game. He had 2.5 tackles for loss. So just some big plays from that LSU defense. And I got to be honest, I thought that Jackson Dart and that Ole Miss offense was going to be able to expose that LSU secondary a little bit more than they did. But that LSU secondary held up well. And then on top of that, the 6 sacks really, and then the tackles for loss. LSU just kind of dominated this game with the line of scrimmage in certain aspects. They weren't able to run the ball, but pass pro and then Ole Miss not being able to protect Jackson Dart really kind of the difference. That and Ole Miss's inability to get off the field in crucial moments, their inability to convert crucial third downs, and then LSU thrived in those moments. So looking at the third down efficiency, 11 for 22 for Ole Miss, 6 for 16 for LSU, 2 for 3. Both teams were 2 for 3 on 4th downs. LSU was actually outgained by Ole Miss. Ole Miss 464 yards to LSU's 421 yards. But ultimately, man, the turnovers. I mean, if you tell me before the game Ole Miss runs for 180 yards to LSU's 84, I'm thinking, wow, Ole Miss may come out there with a win. But 12 penalties, the turnovers, and then the 12 penalties. 12 penalties for 110 yards to LSU, 6 penalties for 45 yards, 12 penalties for 110 yards for Ole Miss. It'll kill you. Now, the turnovers evened out. LSU did commit 2 as well, but it was just the time, right? It's kind of like the third downs. When you look at the numbers, that look that different than each other, but it just felt like in those certain times, LSU made the plays on third down, and Ole Miss didn't make the plays. So now Ole Miss sitting at a disappointing 5-2, a disappointing 1-2 in the SEC. Not what Ole Miss envisioned this year. LSU, however, still alive with their whole season in front of them. Tough opening week loss to USC, but they've bounced back. Still got some big games. Number 8 in the country right now, so they're in the thick of this playoff hunt. Garrett Nussmeier can make all the throws. He's a gunslinger now. He'll put it in trouble too, right? 3 touchdowns, 2 interceptions on the night. You get a little bit of everything with him, but he can make every throw. Sometimes that gets him into trouble. But big-time night in Baton Rouge. Shout out to Brian Kelly, undefeated at night, coming into his 3rd season now at LSU. That's big time, man. That's big time. They'll love you for that. They'll love you for that, pulling out. That's just a classic Ole Miss LSU game. I was so hyped for the game. And I thought it was just the craziest, the wildest, the most entertaining game of the year. So shout out to both teams. Ole Miss left everything out there on the field, but ultimately, you got to make the plays, man. You got to make the plays. Ole Miss didn't make the plays. LSU Tigers did, and they get a big-time dub Saturday night in Baton Rouge. Another classic game this weekend. Alabama 27, South Carolina 25. Man, so I was actually covering Auburn played Florida State in a fall ball baseball game in Pensacola, my hometown. So I was actually covering that game, and in the press box, all the reporters had this game on the laptop, watching this fourth quarter. What a crazy game! Alabama these last 3 weeks have been must-see TV. Like, it's definitely been entertaining. They get out of here with a win, a disappointing loss for Shane Beamer. He's got to feel like with this loss to LSU and this loss to Alabama, like they had a couple of big dogs on the rope, and they just weren't able to finish it off. Taking a look at the stats, Lenore Sellers, starting quarterback for South Carolina, 23 for 31, 238 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception thrown. Jalen Milroe, 26 for 23, 209 yards, 1 touchdown to 2 interceptions for the Alabama quarterback. Disappointing day. Then when we go to the ground, Lenore Sellers has 16 carries for 19 yards. Jalen Milroe added 18 carries for 36 yards. He did have 2 touchdowns on the ground, though, so making up a little bit for those 2 interceptions through the air. Alabama just was not able to establish a run on the South Carolina defensive line, and I think that we've seen enough from this Gamecock defensive line to say that that's probably going to be something that teams just struggle to do. Those guys are for real down there. And then looking at South Carolina, Raheem Sanders, Rocket Sanders getting 16 carries for 78 yards and a touchdown, 4.9 yards a carry. They probably wish they could have got him a couple more carries or maybe some more from Lenore Sellers on the ground. Oscar Attaway III had 4 carries for 14 yards. That's just not enough. Robbie Ashford, the backup quarterback, the dynamic backup there with 2 carries for 11 yards. He did have 1 run of 9 yards. They just needed a little bit more there on the ground. And again, similar to the Ole Miss LSU game we just talked about, just not making the plays, South Carolina had every opportunity to win this game. Really a crazy situation at the end of the game. Alabama wide receiver has the ball in the field of play. He has the touchdown in front of him. If he goes down, then the Alabama's able to run the clock out. He punches it in the end zone because he's got to get the touchdown, right? And then South Carolina comes down and scores. Goes for 2, doesn't get it. Alabama holds up. Look, Kalen DeBoer, you had to have this one. Because if Kalen DeBoer would have lost to Vanderbilt and then came home and lost to South Carolina, boy, oh boy, oh boy, we all know what the discussion would have been, right? Third down efficiency, South Carolina 7 for 15, Alabama 5 for 11. South Carolina was 1 for 2 on 4th down. Alabama was 1 for 1. South Carolina outgains Alabama 374 yards to 313. Passes for 242 to Bama's 209. Alabama turned the ball over twice or at least it threw 2 interceptions to the 1 for South Carolina. Then you get to the fumbles, though. In a game that you lost by 2, South Carolina, 4 turnovers on the day. 3 of those are fumbles lost. And you just have the 2 interceptions thrown by Jalen Milroe for Alabama's 2 turnovers there. And that's the difference. Those 2 possessions are the difference in a game that you lose by 2 if you're South Carolina. Heartbreaking loss for the Gamecocks. But I still think that if you're South Carolina, you got to feel like you have 6 games ahead of you to where you can finish this thing off and have a decent 7 to 8 win season. There's still a lot to fight for. South Carolina's recruiting well. Again, tough losses to a couple of big dogs, games that they felt like they probably should have won. I wouldn't say they should have. I don't know if they ever felt like they should have won this game versus Alabama, but they definitely had it. Like, it was definitely there for the taking, right? And they just weren't able to close it out, and Alabama was. And I know that the Alabama fans are upset about the second half of the Georgia game, the Vanderbilt performance, and then the South Carolina game. But look, you're 5-1. you're 2-1 in the SEC, and this has been just one of those college football seasons that has been absolutely nuts. So it kind of feels just like a survive and advance situation. And look, Alabama's definitely got things that they got to clean up. Jalen Monroe just has not looked comfortable these last couple of weeks. Um, I think a lot of that was probably South Carolina's defensive line getting after him, and then Vanderbilt just really kind of kept him off the field. But let's see what Alabama. Let's see. I know there's going to be a lot of noise this week just because the expectation there is high, but you're going into Rocky Top this weekend, third Saturday in October. Huge rivalry game versus Tennessee Volunteers, who we'll talk about in just a second, who are not playing their best football either, but they're still winning games. So if you're Alabama, that's the way I would look at it. Hey, we're trying to sort through some things, but we're 5-1 in a year that outside of Texas, nobody's playing perfect football, right? Everybody's gettable. So this was a game that you could have lost, and I think back to that Arkansas game last year for Bama, right? A bad Arkansas team. Alabama escapes with a win on, and really that didn't mean a whole lot because Bama still was able to win the SEC, go to the playoff, and lost a very, very great, very, very close ball game to the Michigan Wolverines, where they didn't have anything to hang their head about. So if I'm Alabama, I would just stack dubs and try to figure out some of these issues. But I know it is definitely Bama fans are used to being able to throw their feet up in the fourth quarter, right? And they've had to been sweating it out these last couple of weeks. It's been interesting to see, but I just think I look across the entire landscape, not just the SEC of college football, and I don't think there's any team that's really dominating right now. So if you're Alabama, just keep stacking up these dubs. South Carolina, you got to bounce back, man. You're a good team, some tough losses, but South Carolina cannot mail it in. I'm interested to see kind of what the middle makeup of the Gamecocks is moving forward. They got Oklahoma coming up Saturday. It's a very winnable game for South Carolina, a very important game. They got to go to Norman. That's tough. To Tuscaloosa, and then to Norman, Oklahoma. But I think South Carolina's a better team than Oklahoma. So they got to go get that game this weekend. Shane Beamer and the Gamecocks dig deep. Let's see what y'all got. The Tennessee-Florida rivalry put up another classic. Tennessee takes down the Florida Gators 23-17. Look, this was one of those old school, just kind of felt like the old school Tennessee versus Florida. Both teams really needed a win, and Billy Napier had a big-time win right there in his fingertips, man, and he let it slip through. 3-3 for the Florida Gators feels a whole lot different than 4-2. Now, I still think 3-3 with the schedule that Florida has is not that bad, but boy, if he could have pulled this one off, if Billy could have pulled this one off and had Florida at 4-2 with a big-time win up in Knoxville, it really would have been huge for him. It would have been, he definitely could have turned to the naysayers and said, hold on, don't count me out yet. Billy needed this one, and a heartbreaking loss in overtime. Like we talked about here with Ole Miss, with South Carolina, you had your opportunities to kind of make it happen, but they just weren't able to do it. Florida starting quarterback Graham Mertz goes out, and he actually put on his Twitter before the game. I'll read it, or excuse me, he put on his Twitter today, and I'll read it off. Gator Nation, thank you for 2 incredible years in Gainesville. Unfortunately, I suffered a torn ACL against Tennessee, and I will miss the remainder of the season. During my recovery, I will remain a part of the program and do whatever I can in meeting rooms and from the sidelines to help my teammates win. I want to thank everyone for the outpouring of support during this time. So that is Florida's starting quarterback, Graham Mertz, torn ACL. He goes out of the game versus Tennessee Vols, and then in comes freshman phenom DJ Lagway. When Graham Mertz went out, he was 11 for 15, 125 yards with 1 touchdown. He was having a solid game. DJ Lagway finished 19 for 17, 98 yards, a touchdown and a pick. It's his team going forward, so that'll definitely be interesting to see. Man, this Tennessee offense just continues to struggle in SEC play. Nico was only 16 for 26, 169 yards, no passing touchdowns, and an interception, a QBR of 17.5. They really, really leaned on Dylan Sampson, 27 carries for 112 yards. He had 3 touchdowns for an average of 4.1 yards a carry. So that was really kind of the Tennessee offense. That was pretty much it. Florida leaned on Montrell Johnson. He had 12 carries for 85 yards, no touchdowns though. And then Florida, it's just 3-0 at halftime, right? And not able to capitalize in the red zone. It felt like at halftime, Florida should have been up, being conservative, 14-0. But you could easily have said 17, 20, 21-0. The inability to punch it in the red zone is what killed Florida in this game. It's 3-0 at the end of the first half, and Tennessee scores 17 points in the second. Goes to overtime, makes the plays when Florida doesn't. It's a disappointing loss for Florida, and when you're down there in the red zone, when you're moving the football, especially on the road, you need points. And they were having possessions where they were coming away and not even getting 3. And you need touchdowns. But to get down into the red zone and to not even get 3, that's a tough deal. Florida's not a good enough team to overcome those kind of situations. Looking at the third downs, Florida was 5 for 15, Tennessee 4 for 15. Neither team was great. Tennessee was 2 for 2 on fourth down to Florida's 0 for 2. Total yards, Florida 361, Tennessee 312. So, and then the rushing was pretty even. Florida ran for 138 and Tennessee ran for 143. I'm looking at this Tennessee offense moving forward, and I'm asking, is this what it is? Does Tennessee not have the ability to stretch the ball downfield on SEC defenses? It's really interesting. That makes this matchup they have coming up with Alabama very, very intriguing. I believe in Josh Heupel. I think Nico is very talented. I think they've got the weapons. I'm not really sure what's going on here. I'm really not. So next weekend, first Alabama, you got 2 teams, so you just don't really know what to expect, right? Like, I don't think Tennessee feels great about the way they're playing, but they got to win. And I'll say the same thing that I said about Alabama, about Tennessee. Hey, just you got the win. I think Florida's better than we thought, and they're certainly better than people are giving them credit for. You got the win, survive in advance. You beat a rival. It's not easy to do. You had 0 points at halftime. You're able to fight back and score 23 in the second half at overtime. So next week, Florida is going to go on the road to Kentucky. Tennessee, again, the big matchup with Alabama. I think if you're Florida, this is a very important game for their season. Similar to the South Carolina game. It's like, all right, you got an opponent you can beat if you're Florida. You got Kentucky coming to the Swamp, 6:45. I think the crowd should be loud there in Gainesville. It should be a problem for Kentucky. Must-win game from Florida if they can get to 4-3 and keep the season alive and still be playing for postseason play. Disappointing loss, though, for the Gators, but all they can do is come back next week and put on a better show. I think they'll do it. Right now, I think that Florida's gonna. I'll pick Florida to beat Kentucky. Very interested to see how DJ Lagway finishes the season out as a starting quarterback there. Speaking of Kentucky drops one to Vanderbilt, 20-13. A disappointing loss for the Wildcats. But how about the Vanderbilt Commodores? Coming off of the biggest win in program history, you were the talk of college football. I kind of expected Vanderbilt maybe to lay an egg. But they said, no, this isn't the same old Vandy that you're used to. Diego Pavia said, no, we're not that team anymore. They go up to Lexington, get a big-time win. Disappointing loss for the Kentucky Wildcats. The Kentucky now falling to 3-3. You thought after that Ole Miss game, maybe they were able to get some momentum, but and have get to like a 7, 8, maybe 9 win mark. And for Kentucky, it's just disappointing. It's just because every time you feel like they got a little bit of momentum and the program's going in a good direction. Look, all credit to Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt's a good team. I know they just beat Alabama, and, I have respect for Vanderbilt. But if you're Kentucky, you beat Ole Miss, you were looking at this game like, all right, this is one that we need to win at home. And they're just not able to do it. 4 for 9 on third down compared to 8 for 13 for Vanderbilt. Kentucky was 4 for 9 on third down, 8 for 13 for Vanderbilt. Kentucky 322 total yards, 288 for Vanderbilt. Kentucky defense continues to play good defense. That offense is just not able to get the job done. Brock Vandegrift, 15 for 25, 158 yards with a touchdown. Diego Pavia for Vanderbilt, 15 for 18, 143 yards, a touchdown, and an interception. So just a disappointing loss, man. Just a disappointing loss if you're the Kentucky Wildcats. Vanderbilt with 7 in the first, 7 in the second, and then a field goal in the third and a field goal in the fourth quarter. Kentucky got a touchdown in the second quarter and then 6 points in the fourth. So just the offensive output not there. The offense for Kentucky continues to let the defense down. I mean, again, if you only gave up 288 yards to a Vanderbilt offense that's been explosive. You only give up 20 points to a Vanderbilt offense that's done some nice things. But story, right? Story is old as time here. 2 turnovers for Kentucky to the 1 turnover for Vanderbilt. Kentucky loses a fumble and throws an interception. 12 penalties for 105 yards to Vanderbilt's 5 for 57. Kentucky just couldn't get the gun away from the foot, continue to shoot themselves in the foot, and there's your ball game, In a game that you lose by a touchdown, when you lose the turnover margin and you commit 12 penalties to their 5, it's tough to overcome. Disappointing loss for Bob Stoops and the Kentucky Wildcats. Like we just talked about, they're going to Florida next week. So, in the same way I said that for Florida, this is a game that Florida feels like they should win. It's like a must win. It's 2, 3, and 3 teams in Florida and Kentucky facing off next week. Big game for both of those programs. And if you're Kentucky, you got to go down to Gainesville and find a way to get that dub. Next weekend, Vanderbilt takes on Ball State. So if you're Vanderbilt, don't do what you did versus Georgia State. Don't shit the bed like you did versus Georgia State. Come in there, handle business at night at home versus Ball State. I got no idea what Ball State's record is. Let me click right here and see. What do the Ball State Cardinals got going on this year? But if you're Vanderbilt, this is a game. You win this game, you get to 5-2, man. If you're Vanderbilt, you get to 5-2 because then they got number 1 Texas coming into town. So, you need this one because you're probably not going to get that one. But if you get to 5-2, then you lose to Texas, you're still sitting at 5-3. Everything's okay. So, there have been a lot of highs for Vanderbilt this year. You're playing good football right now. Continue to play good football. Be the team that you should be in the 2-4 Ball State Cardinals. So, hey, big shout out to Clark Lee, man. He's got this thing rolling up there in Nashville right now. They're finding ways to get win. It's not easy to go into Lexington and get a dub. Vanderbilt was able to do it. Not easy after you were just had the biggest win in program history. Shout out to the Commodores, man, putting together a nice little winning streak, doing their thing. All right, this will be pretty quick right here because there's not a whole lot to talk about, man. Red River Shootout in the Cotton Bowl. Texas dominates Oklahoma, man. Disappointing showing for Brett Venables and the Sooners. A little bit of a slow start for Texas. 3-0. Oklahoma led at the end of the first quarter, and then Texas explodes for 21 in the second, a field goal in the third. They added in 10 more points in the fourth. After that field goal for Oklahoma in the first, that was it. They were done scoring. Texas advances to 6-0, number 1 team in the country. Oklahoma falls to 4-2, 1-2 in the SEC. Taking a look at the team stats. Third down efficiency. Oklahoma 4 for 15. Texas was 5 for 13. Total yards, though, Texas 406 to Oklahoma's 237. Texas passed for 229 yards to Oklahoma's 148. Texas ran for 177 yards to Oklahoma's 89. And Oklahoma with the 2 turnovers to Texas's 1. Penalties, Oklahoma commits 7 to Texas's 5. And Quentin Ewers in his return game off of injury goes 20 for 29, 199 yards. He had a touchdown and interceptions. Michael Hawkins over there for Oklahoma, the true freshman. Not a bad day, 19 for 30 for 148 yards. At least not a bad day statistically, but he just wasn't able to create anything. They weren't able to make any big plays happen at all. Just a really stale showing from that Oklahoma offense. Wisner for Texas added 13 carries to 118 yards on the ground with a touchdown. So big time win for Texas. The first time the Red River Shootout, both teams were SEC teams, and Texas is able to say, hey, we're 1-0 in this rivalry when it comes to being conference opponents here in the SEC. And right now it just looks like two teams going in two different directions, right? Sark has got this thing rolling. Oklahoma, you got a lot of questions. Scoring only 3 points, not going to cut it. I still think that Oklahoma has a good defense, but they've got to figure out something on offense moving forward. I don't know if that's. I'm thinking maybe try to run the ball, but the offensive line it's just been so bad they haven't been able to establish the run at any point in the season, and that's really where all the issues kind of come in for the Sooners. So I don't know what you're going to do if you're Brent Venables moving forward. It just looks like this year they're kind of stuck with what they got up front. It's tough. Looking at Texas, though, you're red hot. And you got the biggest game of your season next week with number 5 Georgia coming into Austin, 6:30 prime time. Who's not ready for that game, man? Who's not ready for Georgia Texas as a SEC game? What a football game that's going to be in Austin, Texas. I can't wait for that. And then looking forward for Oklahoma, that South Carolina game. So we talked about that big time for Shane Beamer, big time for Brent Venables. You can get to 5-2, and that's still respectable. You lose this game, you fall to 4-3. You'd be 1-3 in the SEC at that point. And it can start to go downhill. It doesn't look like a good matchup on paper. Looking at Oklahoma's offensive line versus South Carolina's defensive line, I'm picking the Gamecocks. Unless something happens throughout the week, I'm picking the Gamecocks. I think Oklahoma's in trouble. Not impressed with what I saw. It was a shootout in Athens, Georgia. A little bit more than we expected. Georgia takes down the Mississippi Bulldogs 41-31. But I'll be honest with you, I didn't see Mississippi State putting up 31 points in Athens. Mississippi's quarterback goes for 20 attempts, 20 completions on 37 attempts, 306 yards, 3 touchdowns to 1 interception. Carson Beck, 36 for 48, 459 yards, 3 touchdowns, 2 interceptions again for Carson Beck. Too many turnovers over here right now for Carson Beck. He's got to get that cleaned up. But ultimately, Georgia gets the win here. I wonder. You had a rivalry game last week in your homecoming game versus Auburn. Kind of one of a classic Georgia win in terms of they just kind of suffocated Auburn and ended up winning 31-13. Was Georgia looking ahead? I don't know. Kirby Smart with the pushing the Mississippi State player, and there's been the we all know the whole arrest stuff going on in Georgia right now. Like I don't know. They're 5-1. They're super talented. I'm gonna believe in Georgia until they prove to us otherwise. But they're just turnovers, and I just don't know. It just seems a little bit undisciplined at times compared to previous Georgia teams. If you're Mississippi State, you lost this game really on third down. 2 for 12 on third down to Georgia being 5 for 11. Georgia outgained Mississippi State 605 yards to 385. Carson Beck threw for 459 yards. Mississippi State with a 306 like we talked about. It's the turnovers, though, is kind of what kept Mississippi State in the game. The 2 interceptions thrown and then to only 1 thrown from Mississippi State. Mississippi State did commit 8 penalties to Georgia's 5, so yeah, if you're Georgia, again, I'm going to keep saying this about some of these teams. I know that they will expected to beat Mississippi State by more. They definitely didn't expect to give up 31, some of these big explosive plays to Mississippi State like they did. But in this college football season, you got the dub. Now, they got a lot to clean up. If they play this way defensively next week for Steve Sarkisian and the Texas Longhorns, they're going to give up more than 31 points. But Carson Beck's also lighting it up through the air. Just got to cut down on the turnovers. We saw the turnovers versus Alabama. You see another multiple turnover game here versus Mississippi State. So let's get that cleaned up here for Georgia. I don't really know what to make of this game, to be honest with you. Mississippi State falls to 1-5. We kind of know what it is there. They put up a good fight. They should be proud of that. Georgia should have beaten them by more, but you still win the game by double digits. You still outgained them by over 200 yards. So at the end of the day, it is what it is. If you're Georgia, you got the dub. You're going into Austin, Texas next week for what is another big-time game. They're 0-1 in those huge matchups, right? They got that close loss to Alabama on the record already. So a win for Georgia this week would be massive, and a close loss wouldn't kill them, but it would leave them with a lot less wiggle room. So my takeaway from this game and from just watching Georgia is it looks like every team outside of Texas right now. Texas looks like the one team in college football that I wouldn't even say that. I was about to say that it looks like they don't have any flaws. Texas has flaws. They're undefeated and they haven't slipped up yet. So it's going to be fun to watch. This has been a wild season, and just another every weekend in the SEC has been super entertaining. So another wild weekend coming up. We know just a big slate. Even some of these games like the South Carolina and Oklahoma, Florida and Kentucky, like there's a lot riding on those games. Auburn going up to Missouri, like Missouri's 5-1, Auburn's 2-4, but Auburn's Auburn has to get a win, and Missouri looks gettable, and the spread at that right now was 6.5. Missouri favored by 6.5. That's a 5-1 team versus a 2-4 team, and they're only favored by 6.5. So I think this weekend coming up is going to be more of the same that we've seen in the SEC this year so far. This has been one hell of a season of college football, man. So thank y'all for watching. Please smash the thumbs up button. So subscribe to the channel if you haven't. Going to keep pumping out this SEC content right here. Love y'all. Appreciate you. I'm out. Peace.